Chapter 14, Part 2 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 14, The Desert Diary Begun, Part 2. All this was beautiful, but I wondered painfully if Monny could be happy in spite of the bumps, now that the desert was taking her. Strange how a disagreeable sensation constantly repeated at the end of a mere bone can change a man's outlook on life. If Monny had come to my camel side and whispered, "I found your buried letter, O Men-Keeper Ra. Behold that bird now flying toward you. It is my Ba, my heart or soul bird carrying the gift of my love," I should with difficulty have prevented myself from snapping out, "Thanks very much, but my good girl, I'm in no mood to talk tommy rot." It was sympathy, kind, friendly sympathy I yearned for, not spoken in words, but given from soft, sweet eyes, as little Biddy had given it when I tore my hands and barked my shins bird's nesting on the rocks 100 years ago. I think we should have liked the excuse to stop and gaze at the ruinous pyramids of Abu Sir, but the dragoman guides supplied by Slaney urged us on to the great plateau of the pyramids and necropolis of Saqqara. There, on the terrace of Mariette's house, we saw a crowd of Cook's tourists from Bedrachen, and I had some moments of guilty fear lest my secret should leak out, as their dragoman rushed down and warmly greeted ours. But in the throes of rolling off their camels for the first time, the ever wakeful suspicions of the Set were submerged under physical emotions. It's an ill camel that bumps no one any good. I was only too glad to lure my charges away from the danger zone, and luckily it was so early that the influential ones who never lunched until 2 at home gave the word "Tombs before food." Girding up its aching loins, the procession allowed itself to be led by me and my dragoman down inclined planes into dark, mysterious warm passages where our lights were wandering red stars. Now and then a face would start suddenly out of the gloom, haloed with candlelight, and in this way Biddy's flashed upon me, starry-eyed. "Oh, I'm glad to see you," she whispered. "Bedr and his 2 tourists are here. I'm afraid." "My dear child," I said soothingly, but not as soothingly as if I hadn't had a toothache in the spine, "you may be afraid of Bedr, but hardly of 2 stout Germans in check suits." "Not if they are Germans. But are they? Just now one of their candles almost collided with mine, and his eyes stared so. Then they looked over my head at Monny, who was behind me, and where she is now, heaven knows. Nothing can happen to either of you here," I assured her, "and probably our fuss about Bedr is much ado about nothing. We have no evidence—" "The man who stared at me over his candle has a scar on his forehead," said Biddy. "Maybe he got it in that row in front of the House of the Crocodile. Maybe he is Burke, and has just come out of the hospital." "Most likely he is Schmidt, and adorned himself with a wound in a student duel," said I. "It's too fresh looking. He must be over 30, she objected, but at that moment Miss Hassett Bean loomed into sight, and in the stuffy atmosphere of the tomb felt the need of my arm to keep her from fainting. We did the Pyramid of Unas, dilapidated without, secretively beautiful within. We went from tomb to tomb, lingering long in the labyrinthine mansion of Mereruka, who, ruddy and large as life, stepped hospitably down in statue form from his stela recess, to welcome us in the name of himself and wife. Almost he seemed to wave his hands and say, "Look at these nice pictures of me and my family and our ways of life, painted on the walls. Our servants, our dwarves, our mountebanks and acrobats, our flocks and herds. Sorry there's no refreshment at present on my alabaster mastaba, or table of offerings, but you see I didn't prepare for visitors outside my own immediate circle of Kas and Bas. Still, as you have come, make yourselves at home, and take pot luck. I think when you've examined everything, you'll admit that you haven't a soul house in Europe to touch mine, which, if I do say it, is the best thing this side of Thebes." Next came the tomb of Tea, but by this time mural representations of fish, flesh and fruit began to be aggravating. It would be past 2 before we could reach our luncheon tent, and somehow it seemed less desirable to feed after than before that sacred hour, though the custom be sanctioned by royalty. "Another tomb to see before lunch?" groaned Sir John Biddle, when the dragoman firmly insisted on the Apis mausoleum. "Oh darn, need we? What? Where they buried bulls? I'd as soon see a slaughter house on an empty stomach. Lady Biddle and I will go sit in the shadow of our camels." And they did, nor would they believe the twins' assertion that the dark mausoleum, with its cavernous rock chambers and granite vaults, was the most impressive thing they had seen in Egypt. "You say that to be aggravating, because we weren't there," I heard Lady Biddle snap, over the grumbling of the camels. The sky blazed down and the sand blazed up. The desert was white hot, with a silver whiteness hotter than gold, and the foreshortened shadows were turquoise blue. It was heaven to arrive at a miniature oasis, and see the open-fronted, awninged luncheon tent reflected with its green frame of palms in a clear lagoon, thoughtfully left by the receding Nile. At the sight of this picture, my popularity went up with a bound. It really was a lovely vision: the big tent lined with Egyptian appliqué work in many colours, the porch-like roof extension supported by poles, and in its shadow a white table loaded with good things and guarded by Arab waiters waving beaded fly-whisks. As we lingered over our chicken salad, fruit, and cool drinks, and lazily watched our camels munching bersim, all our first enthusiasm for these interesting beasts steamed back. The ladies called them poor dears, and sweet things, and the men marvelled at their calm endurance, or the number of their leg joints. Monny was gay and charming, and looked at me so kindly that I thought she must mean to give a favourable answer to the buried letter. I blessed Cleopatra for the tip she had given, though I wondered what was the humiliation from which I could save her niece. "After all," said I, "the desert trip's going to pan out a success." But it must have been about this time that the wind rose. It blew Miss Hassett Bean's hat up instead of down, and other hats off, when we had started again, and it blew into our eyes grains of sand as large as able-bodied paving stones. Also, as we passed through a picturesque mud village which ought to have pleased everybody, it blew into our noses smells which Lady Biddle knew would give us plague. As if this were not enough, the sand cart nearly turned over in a rut, and Miss Hassett Bean said that she must go home or be left in the desert to die. I had to lead the little stallion before she would consent to go on, and I realized when I had ploughed through 50 yards of sand that the manicured snob of a leader was a thin brown hero. By the time I had a mile or two of this, the dark pyramids of Dahshur were visible, and I knew that our camp was to be pitched not far beyond. My first emotion was pleasure, my second panic. What if Slaney had forgotten his promise to remove the cook labels? Since remounting Farag, only the coastguard camels had names; the baggage camels smelt as sweet without. Monny and I had been bumping along side by side, and she had just said, "If I tell you something, you'll never breathe it to a soul, will you?" when I saw those pyramids and was smitten with the fear of Cook. "Never," I vowed, torn between the desire to hear her secret, and to dash ahead of the caravan into camp. "It's about Antoun," Monny went on. "You know I said to you the other night that perhaps I knew something about him?" "Yes, oh yes." We were within a few hundred yards of the pyramids now. At any instant the camp might burst into sight. "You don't look interested." "But I am, awfully." "You're sure you won't tell?" "Dead sure." Was that a flag fluttering on the horizon? "Well then, it isn't my business, of course. But one can't help being interested in him. He's such a romantic sort of figure, as you said yourself. And there's something so high and noble about him, I mean about his looks and manners, that one hates to be disappointed." "You would have him with us, you know." "I know, and I'm glad we have got him. It's an experience. I suppose he's rather wonderful. But don't you think he ought to remember that he isn't exactly a prince? He isn't even called Bey. And if he were, it's not the same as being a prince of ancient Egypt." "In what way has he presumed on his near princehood?" "I believe he has fallen in love with Biddy." "By Jove! Let the flag flutter." "What flag?" "Oh, that was only an expression. They use it where I live. Why shouldn't he fall in love with Biddy, when you come to think of it?" "He's of a darker race. Though he does seem to like us. Of course she couldn't marry him. It wouldn't do. Would it?" "I don't know. I must think it over. Is that all you were going to tell me?" "No. I suppose it's natural he should fall in love with Biddy. She's so attractive. But the worst part about it is that he has proposed to Aunt Clara." "Not possible!" "Yes, he has. I saw part of the letter, the first part. She's the only one of us who thinks it would be right to marry a man of Egyptian blood, because you know she believes she's Egyptian herself, and she's always talking about reincarnations. I don't